My guests today are a really beautiful group of young women, mothers who have been through some really hard stuff. And I'm so thankful that you all would come and join me and talk a little bit about your experiences. Would you start by just telling me a little bit about yourself? Maybe we'll start with Chris and then go to Christine and Emma. A little background about yourselves and then how you know each other.
My name is Chris Frazier, and in 2019, we lost our 2-month-old baby girl named Emily to a genetic condition called trisomy 18, or Edwards syndrome, which is an extra copy of the 18th chromosome. And I found the PALS, pregnancy or parenting after loss group, shortly after we had decided we were going to try again after Emily. My counselor at the time said, hey, if you're thinking about trying again to have another baby, here's a group that would be super helpful for you, because pregnancy after loss can be really scary. And so I contacted the group coordinator, and our first meeting was actually just me and her, because nobody else had come to that particular day of group. It's kind of one of those drop in, drop out sort of situations. And so it was actually just me and her. And ever since then, it's been really awesome to just be a part of the group and get to talk to each other and commiserate. And yeah.
Thank you, Chris. And give me, even though you've been on the podcast before, just give a little bit of background about yourself as well.
So I live in Spokane, Washington. I have 2 children, Earthside, and as I said, 1 in heaven. Sydney is 10 and Henry is almost 3. And then my husband, Seth. And we have 2 dogs and a cat. And yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Christine.
Hi, I'm Christine Harden. I am a San Diego native, and I grew up there, and that's where I met my husband at Mission Beach. We just randomly met. We we got married in 2018, and he joined the Air Force, and so I am now an Air Force wife, military wife, and we've been to Japan for our first assignment for 3 years. And then we moved here in Spokane. We are avid hikers. We love to paddleboard. We just are very nature enthusiasts. So we absolutely just being outside.
Oh, this is a great place to be then.
Yeah, we absolutely love Spokane, and we are not used to the snow. So this was something that we learned to get used to. And so I met Chris through my friend Carrie through a support group. We had a baby girl, and she unfortunately had a chromosome abnormality. And after my anatomy scan, I was put into a high risk type of appointment, and found out that she no longer had a heartbeat. So I had her in January 8th, this year, 2024. So.
Oh my goodness. So this is very fresh for you.
It is.
Thank you so much for coming and talking to us. I really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And Emma.
Yeah. My name is Emma Woolley, and I was actually born in Rhode Island, and then we moved to Spokane in 2004 as a family. And I met my husband on a ballroom dance floor doing West Coast swing dancing. And we got married in 2013 and started trying to have kids a couple years later, and quickly realized that it's not as easy as it sounds. So we struggled through, I would say silently, kind of unknown to a lot of our family and friends, for 6 years before we told people, hey, we've been trying for a while and things aren't going well. And I actually found PALS, the support group that Chris had mentioned, through a friend in the athletic world. And she had told me, hey, you should go check this group out. I knew about them for a few months and honestly couldn't bring myself to go, because I felt like I didn't have a tangible problem I could say, I lost a child or something. It felt almost fake to me, or not real. And one we meet on Tuesdays. One Monday, I had a huge breakdown and I was just sobbing and bawling on the kitchen floor. And my husband said, "Isn't that group tomorrow? I think you should go." And so I went and met Chris and have been, like she said, kind of drop in, drop out as you kind of need some support and some connection.
Thank you for sharing that. So your loss was this long-term infertility. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So,
okay.
yeah.
And then Christine and Chris, you have had children that were born with with a chromosomal difficulty.
Yes.
That's correct. So this is a diverse group. I am so interested in how your experience together has been helping you to heal, because what you have all been through is really, really tough. So why don't we start with that? What comes to mind?
I was really angry for a long time, and connecting with other people that have been through grief, I pretty quickly realized that grief manifests differently. Like, we have different reasons that we grieve. Maybe it was divorce or loss of a child or loss of a parent or loss of a career, something that was really deep and meaningful. It looks different to each person, but we all feel the same way about that grief. And understanding that helped me to feel like I had community, that just because somebody else hasn't been through the type of infertility that I've been through, they still get it. They still understand the feelings of anger and the feelings of frustration. And connecting with this group, I would also say, has made me realize that feelings are just feelings and they're okay to have. I was almost mad at myself for being angry, and I felt
Mhm.
guilty about that. And I felt like I shouldn't be upset that other people are getting pregnant. Like, this is a miracle. This is a blessing. And I would be so mad about it. And
But
to
that's so
realize then,
normal.
yeah, to realize that that's normal and that it's okay and they're just feelings, and to allow myself to feel, I think is one of the things that really helped me get to a place where I wasn't as angry anymore.
And this is a group where you could feel and share your feelings and see that it was okay.
Yeah, I think that it was the first time I had shared about infertility where somebody didn't try to give me advice. And they just kind of gave me space to be sad, and they gave me space to be mad, and, as you said, to grieve. Where if you haven't been through loss, then I think people are really uncomfortable with seeing people sad. And so they try to give advice because ultimately it makes them feel like they're contributing and they're doing something to help the situation. Like, oh, if I can make Chris feel better about XYZ situation, then I've done something for her. I helped. And the reality is, it just sucks. Like, there's nothing anyone can do to make it better other than just make space for whatever emotions are happening at that moment.
That's fantastic, Emma. I see you both nodding your heads. Do you want to speak to what she's been saying?
I think for me, PALS was huge because, as Emma said, like you have this community, right? People that it was safe to feel your feelings with, you know. Before, like my first PALS meeting, I had just lost Emily and we hadn't quite decided yet that we were ready to try. We were sort of thinking about it, but not really sure, and um, being able to just have a group of people who could say, yeah, I get it. And having that space to just be vulnerable and feel how I felt and not worry about people trying to fix it, because a lot of people that you would talk to, if they didn't exactly get it, they would try to give advice or say the things that people always say to placate, oh, well, at least this or blah, 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 and with this group, I never had to feel like that. Like I could just come and talk and feel, and everybody just nodded their heads and loved me, and it was okay. Like it's been amazing. And then, through when I actually did get pregnant again, then having other people who could empathize with what it's like to be pregnant after having a loss, and that feeling of being afraid every single moment of the pregnancy up until that kid is safely in your arms, like it's just a whole different ball game. When I was pregnant with our first daughter, like I was just blissfully ignorant, right? Like I had no idea how lucky I was every single day to still be pregnant, And so to go from that experience and then Emily's pregnancy to then have Henry's pregnancy and be like, oh my gosh, this is terrifying. Have a safe place to feel those feelings and process them with people who get it was completely invaluable.
That sounds like such a gift, what you're explaining. And Christine, did you have those blissful first pregnancy feelings, or at what point did you find out that things were not running smoothly?
Absolutely. Like when you get through that hump, I think it's like 12 weeks, you're like, oh, I'm in the safe zone. I feel like I can start actually enjoying my pregnancy, knowing that nothing is going to happen to you. And you felt like you were safe. And so you actually started enjoying your pregnancy, and you're actually feeling that like, wow, I'm actually going to be a mom. Like this is my time. And I feel like it's always the anatomy scan. The anatomy scan is when it's like, oh, we found something that, for me, it was like her size was small. She was really small. And so they gave me some bad news. And I was like, okay, do you what? I was optimistic, honestly. I was like, oh, she's just a tiny baby. I really didn't like have that, like, I wasn't scared yet. And I'm like, she's just little. It's not like her heart is like abnormal or anything. It could be way worse. And so when I was sent to the high risk pregnancy center, and that's when I was given the bad news, I was in total shock. I didn't think this was a possibility. And I knew that, I just knew from there on, like the tremendous grief just hit. For me, grief is so crazy. It's exhausting. You feel like you're on this roller coaster, and you feel like you want to get off the ride, and you just don't. Like it just comes in waves, and you have to take that wave hit by hit. And so for me, I remember the first 2 weeks when I was grieving after I was induced and gave birth to her. I remember telling my husband, like, I want to get off this ride. I'm ready to get off this ride. I don't know how I can survive this. And then on, I knew that I needed help. I knew I could not do this alone. And I knew that the support group that I found through Chris, I knew that this was something that was going to help me heal, and actually people will understand me emotionally and understand the right words to say, honestly, because society, they don't know what to say, especially when you are dealing with a baby or infertility. There's no manual to really the right words to say. And we don't have a manual to show us how to heal from this, because honestly, I feel like there isn't really healing for this. There really is just, you're learning to live with it at this point. So
yeah, that's that's an interesting point, isn't it? You are forever changed.
mm-hmm.
Would you say you can never go back to that innocence?
Absolutely.
That you had before.
That's how I felt. And I probably should have said at the beginning too, that last year we did IVF and had a daughter through IVF, but I didn't get that blissful pregnancy, that innocent naivety, because when you're in the world of infertility, right along with that is miscarriage and stillborn and baby loss. And so I still feel disconnected from her. Like we're still kind of having some bonding issues, because I think I put so many walls up and just trying to not feel the pain that Chris and Christine have described. Like that's what I was trying to avoid during my whole pregnancy, was I don't want to be upset if I lose her, which is ridiculous. Like that's kind of a ridiculous mindset. But
it doesn't sound ridiculous to me. That sounds completely normal.
Yeah.
Sad, right? sad because you have this beautiful baby, and she is beautiful. We got to see a little flash of her. How is your experience with her? Is she healthy? Is she thriving?
She's amazing. She is truly like the easiest baby that I think anybody could have given us. I own a business and I grew it from the ground up. And to be honest with you, doing that was harder than having her. She sleeps 8 to 10 hours at night. Breastfeeding is going awesome. She's gaining weight. She's not super colicky. She's happy. Like, she's just literally the easiest baby in the world. And so in my mind, there shouldn't be any like emotional connection issues because she's not hard. She's really easy, but it's something that I think when you deal with infertility for almost a decade, it's an identity shift to go, I'm a mom now. Like I actually am.
That makes a lot of sense.
Really hard to wrap your mind and heart around.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Wow. How do you identify yourselves? Do you think of yourselves as women and mothers who've been through something really terrible and difficult? Do you feel separate or different from other women that you meet? You feel like you're just on a spectrum? What do you think?
I do sometimes feel different. Back to the PALS group, like one thing that Carrie, the group leader, tries to do is find social activities that we can do together. Like today, we had a play date just for PALS because sometimes it's really hard to go from being a bereaved mother, lost mom. There's lots of different names, like you said, how do we identify ourselves? It's different when you're with women who have never experienced loss because they just speak differently, and they're not mindful of triggers and things because they've never had that type of experience to have to worry about, And so we've talked a lot about in group about how sometimes, maybe you're at a play group with a bunch of moms who have never experienced loss and they're complaining about something that's totally, totally trivial. And you're like, do you have any idea how lucky you are to have that to worry about? Because our perspective is just so different. And so, yeah, I personally, not that it like makes me special or anything, but like, I definitely do feel like I have a different perspective than a mom who maybe hasn't been through a loss. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be the exact same type of loss, just loss in general. I just think it gives you a little bit different perspective on things.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. What do you think, Christine?
I have to agree. Like, it definitely is different with people who actually have the full depth understanding of losing a child. They're more gentle with you and they know and can relate to you much better. It's funny because I feel like this new generation is coming out and they accept us mothers who have lost a baby. They still look at you as a mother. And some people and that's kind of hard too, because especially Mother's Day is coming up soon for me. So a lot of women will tell me Happy Mother's Day, even though my baby isn't Earthside. But other people don't really look at me as a mom because my baby isn't on Earthside. So there is a different, it really just depends on the person's perspective and stuff. So I have to agree, I do feel a little different, and I do feel like the people that do understand, they're way more gentle with you.
I think that for me, everything you said, Christine, I was like, man, I relate a lot to that. And there is Bereaved Mother's Day, which is the Sunday before Mother's Day. And the last couple of years, people reached out to me and said, hey, just thinking about you today. And I almost felt mad about it. Because I so badly wanted to be a mom and I wasn't, no matter how you cut it. I'd never been pregnant. I'd never even miscarried in the first week or anything like that. There was no tangible, anything that I could cling to and say, I can claim that holiday. But I still felt this huge sense of loss of motherhood. And now I'm shifting my identity, I would say. I really appreciate people who've been through loss because they will allow you to talk about your loss without it being weird. I have a really good friend whose brother committed suicide a few years ago, and she was always so sad that no one asks her about her brother anymore. You know, nobody says happy birthday on his birthday. Nobody, when Facebook memories come up that he's in, people just ignore it. Like he never existed. And I think when you've been through grief, you have a little bit of a better sense of it's okay to ask. Like, I want to know what do you want to tell your brother today? What do you want to tell Emily today? Because we want those people and the things that we've lost to have been real. And
Yes.
ignoring them, it's just, I think that when you talk about identity, I think that's a big piece of people who've lost anything, is that we're willing to talk about our loss.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yes. And it sounds to me, just from listening to the three of you talking together, there doesn't seem to be this hierarchy of loss, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've had different losses because sometimes what I worry about, even on the podcast, is I don't ever want to have this feeling like this person's loss was greater than that person's loss, or well, at least I'm sure you've heard, well, at least you got to, or at least this, those kind of statements are so demoralizing to the pain that people feel, right? And I'm
It's
hearing so
interesting.
much.
I was going to say, it's interesting you say that because I felt like I was at the bottom of the hierarchy for a long time. And I agree with you. I don't think there is a hierarchy of loss, but I would have said, but I didn't lose a real person.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't lose a real person. I didn't carry a baby for 9 months like Chris did, deliver her, bring her home, love her, and then lose her. Like I didn't get, so it's not this, like I had a really hard time ignoring a hierarchy and just going, grief is grief and loss is loss. And it doesn't
Don't
matter
you
if you
think
lost
that's
your
normal?
baby.
Don't you
Yeah,
think
I
that's normal
do.
though? That in your head, you feel like there's a hierarchy and you try to figure out where you are on it. But in reality, that's kind of damaging, isn't it?
Very.
I totally think so. Now I do. Took me a while to get there. But.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I always have people, like in this world, people that have had miscarriages will be like, oh, well, at least, you got to meet your baby or whatever, or they would like minimize their own loss. Like, oh, but you actually got to take your baby home and that had to have been so much harder. And I'm like, well, yeah, but how hard is it to want this pregnancy so bad and then lose it right in the beginning and never have had any of the experiences, like, and so I always try to say like, it's not harder or easier. It's just different. Like it's still a loss. It's just a different loss. It's not a better loss or a worse loss or a harder loss or whatever. It's just different, but it's still loss and it still sucks.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that I see people who either haven't lost or haven't dealt with their loss say is they will try to make it about a hierarchy. I guess that's what I'll say.
Mm-hmm.
They will try to place how sad they should be for you according to some scale of how sad they think you should be. And I remember one time I had someone say to me, we had a mutual friend that her husband was going through chemotherapy for cancer, and it was a really difficult situation. I was right in the throes of infertility. I was really mentally unwell with the whole thing. And this friend said, well, kind of friend, I guess, said, well, at least your husband isn't dying of cancer. Infertility isn't really something to be sad about.
Mm-hmm.
And it really hurt my feelings. But then, like, as I processed that and thought about it, I was like, well, she has this hierarchy of who gets to grieve and who doesn't get to grieve. And I think that's a mindset that tears people and friendships and relationships and communities apart. Like Chris said, it's just different. It looks different, but it's not better or worse.
Yeah.
I get that. Mm-hmm.
Christine, I was interested because of your experience with the Air Force. You're moving around. Are you guys at Fairchild?
Yes, we are.
Yeah. So that's what brought me up here with my So when I met my husband, he was widowed, but he was being assigned to Fairchild, which is what brought us to Spokane, and we loved it, so we stayed.
That's awesome.
Uh,
Yeah.
how I'm impressed that you thought to reach out. The Air Force community can be really tight and helpful. People who are in the military understand. They make friends quickly.
Yeah.
But how did you know that you were going to need this kind of support?
So honestly, right when I found out my baby passed away, I knew I couldn't do it alone because this is something that is so traumatizing. And I just knew because for me, you hear the horror stories, and I'm not going to lie, I had some intrusive thoughts. Like, I did not want to continue. Like, I honestly had some thoughts of wanting to drive into a tree. And there was times where I'm like, and so it scared me. And so I told my husband, I was like, look, like, I need help. Like, he actually was deployed when we found out that she passed. So I
Oh
had,
no.
yeah, it was crazy. It was a really crazy time because he left when I was probably 2 or 3 months, and I was starting to show, and he would have been gone for 6 months. So by the time he came back, we would have been ready to have her. But so I guess 4 months into deployment, I got the bad news, and so we had to get an emergency flight for him through Red Cross to have him come back. And so that took him 2 days because he was in the Middle East during that time. So I was kind of doing this by myself in a way. So I remember having a phone call with him and said, I honestly don't know how I'm going to go through this. I don't know how I'm going to get induced, and knowing that she's going to be, gone. So I believe that I knew I needed that extra help. I needed that extra support because I didn't know how I was going to go through it. So right away, I told the nurses, I'm like, I need antidepressants. I knew that was something I needed. I knew that was going to help me get through my days and stuff. But then I knew that people who I talked to, they just didn't know what to say. I didn't get that support through people who didn't truly understood of losing a baby. And I know everyone's just like, and I always got the response of, I'm so sorry for your loss. I can never imagine, kind of thing. So obviously I felt like I was alone, and I didn't want to feel alone. So I knew that getting into the support group was going to help me. I was looking for podcasts, and listening to people's story really helps me because they understood exactly what you're going through, and they knew exactly what to say and how to get through just getting yourself out of that dark space, because I was in that dark space and I didn't want to be stuck in that dark space, and I needed to get out of it because I didn't know because I didn't want to get back into the dark space and not knowing how to get out of it. And
Mm-hmm.
it was I just am so happy because I immediately got help right away. And that's what I feel like helped me.
And again, and tell me again, how did you get connected specifically to PALS? Is it a Spokane area group? Is it a national group?
So it is a Spokane support group. So for me, I was not afraid to tell people my story. And I told my yoga studio and told them, hey, like I can't come in for a month, and, can you pause my membership because I lost my baby? And during that time, I was doing yoga classes, and a lot of the teachers knew me. And so they felt so terrible because they saw me growing, and they saw me just going through the excitement of having a baby. And so they felt terrible. And one of the women who was in charge of PALS, Carrie, she reached out. She said, hey, I have a support group, which was amazing because it just fell into place for me, knowing that there is someone that knows the feeling and had connections of people knowing of support for you. And so I feel like that was just meant to be for me. Like, I needed to go, and that was a sign for me, like, here's your support group, go to it. And the community is amazing, honestly.
That's amazing that you would have been in yoga with someone who happened to be, a support group leader.
Absolutely. It's so
What a
crazy.
blessing. What a fantastic thing.
Yeah, and it's crazy because it's more common than you think.
That is a key point, isn't it?
Oh.
All of these losses, all of these experiences are way more common than we think.
Christine, can I ask, where are you guys at now with having kids? Did you find out that her condition was genetic and could happen again just through your husband and you, or?
So we're actually in the process of that right now. We found out she had a chromosome abnormality. Because we did have a miscarriage before her. And it's funny because everyone was warning me, hey, when you're trying the first time, you could have a miscarriage. It's a really high possibility. And so I'm like, okay, this is a possibility. Never thought of it. And then the second time, Indy, which is the one that we lost this year, she was supposed to be a rainbow baby. So after we had the stillbirth, they told us we should go to just the geneticist to see if we have any like chromosome transfers. And we're right now in the process to see if I'm a carrier. It's called a chromosome transfer carrier. And that's hereditary. And honestly, you're more likely to like miscarry the first trimester. And then there's like a lot of like things that could go wrong pretty much. So you could have a special needs baby, you could have a stillbirth baby, it's up in the air. So with our baby, for chromosome 13, she had chromosome 16, she had an extra copy, and chromosome 13 was a deletion. So it's really weird how it all just fell into place. So we're right now testing to see if we're carriers. And at the same time, like, we're not sure if we're capable of having kids. We're possibly, when we find out the answer, we both decided we're not going to have kids because we just don't want to put our baby through that, to know there's a possibility of her having a heart condition or just something that she just would be suffering. We wouldn't want that for her. So in a way, if we do find out we aren't able to have kids, we'll be grieving parenthood down that road.
Mm-hmm.
So
Is that something that you can do, like IVF, and do genetic testing on the embryos to eliminate those?
yes, but honestly, it's even with IVF, it's like you're still not sure to even grab embryos if it's like a transfer of something. They could tell. And so for us, financially, it would be hard on us. And secondly, for us, we're just like, we don't know if this even is going to work or not. Because even if you do IVF, there still is a high chance of it not working.
Oh, very high. Yeah.
So we're kind of just like, if this isn't for us, like if we can't have our own baby, we might adopt, or we might just not have any babies. So we're just still in that process. You just never know. Like, we're still trying to figure it all out, and just from there, it's just we don't know what the future has for us yet. But it's just part of our journey at this point. So
That's so hard.
yeah,
That's
so
a
hard.
lot. Yeah. Yeah, you've been through quite a journey already, and it sounds like and that is grief, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Don't you think there's no like beginning and end? You become a different person. I think Emma, you kind of alluded to that. It's never really resolved. You move to a new realm, a new sphere.
Yeah.
One thing that I'm picking up on, though, is it sounds like your husbands have all been amazing. Is this true?
Mm-hmm.
It's a daily struggle.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Tell me about how that has been for you as a couple, the experiences that you've had.
I can start. One of the things that actually PALS really helped me with is understanding that people grieve differently. And I think that was a really difficult thing in our marriage to begin with. Was I felt like my husband's grief should look like mine. He should be as sad as I am on cycle day 1, of when my period starts, and we've realized we have another, month that we didn't conceive.
Mhm.
And he should be crying and he should be not wanting to get out of bed just like me. And, I very immaturely didn't really consider that his grief might be very different than mine. And so that was a real struggle for a couple of years and really started to tear us apart. And there was a lot of statistics on how, I'm not sure about miscarriage, but at least infertility affects marriages. And a lot of marriages don't make it through infertility. And I think it's because we all see sadness and grief differently. And at a certain point, I didn't even want to talk to him about it because I was just so afraid he was going to say something that would be even more hurtful, and a piece in which he wasn't saying hurtful things. I was so sensitive that I was afraid that something hurtful would come out and I wouldn't be able to handle it. And in our situation, he would have been fine to not have kids. I was the big driver of wanting to have kids. And so every month that we didn't conceive, I almost felt angry at him. Like, see, aren't you happy now? Another month where you don't have to worry about having a kid. And like, obviously that wasn't fair to him to like think like that or to have those mindsets, but it was how I was processing my grief at the time, was to be mad at him. I was shifting that emotion away from myself and going to PALS and hearing other people say that they also had those same feelings of frustration and irritation with their spouse. I was like, oh, really? Okay, that's an okay feeling.
Right. That's
Almost
normal.
giving myself that permission to feel that made me no longer actually that mad at him. And it made me able to have a conversation with him where I could say, I was really mad at you about this. Do you want to tell me, are you actually grieving? Like, how does this look for you? And me not making assumptions about it. And now I would say, as a very brand new parent, it's really wild having gone through the challenges we went through, because it forced us to either we're going to get divorced or we're going to get a lot closer. But like, it's going to be one or the other. Like, you don't make it through grief without doing one of those two things. And I see other of our friends who are really struggling in their marriage now as new parents because they've never been forced to learn how to communicate or to talk about each other's emotions or to be so vulnerable that you're, crying and upset with each other. And also, it's okay. Like, to give yourself the permission that like, we can be upset and that's okay. So it's been really good for us, but it was not a smooth process to get there.
That's such an interesting gift to think that struggle you had for so long actually was a huge preparation for this disruption that happens when you have a new baby. That's such a great insight.
Yeah, we actually had a really difficult delivery with her too, and there was many times that I was so thankful that we'd gone through infertility, because I'd learned to give up control. I'd learned that I can influence things, but I do not, at the end of the day, get the say on what happens. And I think because I'd already developed that mindset, I don't have resentment about how our labor and delivery went. And I know a lot of women who do. And so again, it's odd. I'm oddly thankful.
Yeah. How about you, Christine? How has this affected your relationship with your spouse?
I think shared trauma has the power to either unite or, like Emma said, it can kind of go one of two ways. For us, I think it definitely brought us closer together because, especially from throughout the pregnancy and, yes, it was happening to my body, but we were both feeling these feelings of what if, and he was coming to all of the appointments with me and he was seeing, the scans on the screen and getting the information from the doctors. Like, it was really a team effort and we were in it together. And then having her home, and having him right there with me. And, we're both doing this really hard thing together. And then when Emily passed away, like he was the last person to hold her. Like she actually passed away in his arms. And when I haven't told this story on the podcast, but Julie knows because she knows the personal story. But when Emily came back to life for those 40 minutes, Seth was the one that was holding her. And so I think those little experiences helped us to both feel it, like it wasn't just all me, it wasn't only happening to my body and only happening to me. And I think a lot of times, especially when you talk about pregnancy and infant loss, like most of the time it's about the mom, right? The mom's the one that carries the baby, and it's mom, 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 mom. And we forget that there's a dad over here who, although his contribution physically was probably minimal, emotionally, it's just as important and just as valid. And so I think a lot of times dads get forgotten in that. And because, as we've talked about before, men grieve differently, right? Like they don't get the opportunity. And this is something actually when our family did the podcast with you, Julie, before, hearing his perspective in a totally different way than even I have heard it before. Men don't have an opportunity to grieve, right? Like we have more of a socially accepted license to grieve, right? Like it's okay for us to cry and to feel all the feels, right? But when a man does it, that's just different. And everyone kind of is like, whoa, a guy's crying, what? It's just socially less accepted for men to feel feelings than it is for women, I think. But then also, if you look at just kind of traditional gender roles, if you will, like oftentimes the man is working full time, and the mom, if she's at home with kids or whatever, like I can break down in the middle of nap time or in the middle of Henry's watching a cartoon or whatever, like when I need to feel my feels, I can feel them because I'm not in the workplace all day long having to put on a happy face and pretend like things are right and go on about my life so that I can earn money to support my family, And so I think not only one bonding us because of, like I said, the shared trauma and the experiences specifically with Emily, but then also just having more understanding and empathy for him and making space for him to feel however he's feeling, whenever he's feeling it, and not being, like Emma mentioned earlier, being mad at him that he's not grieving the same way as me, because I have felt that way a lot too. Like especially in the beginning, it seemed like he just moved on faster than me, and it was really just because he had to go back to supporting our family. Whereas I was at home and could work through whatever I wanted to work through. And I could go to PALS and cry with a bunch of women. And I could do all of these things. And I could go cry to my counselor. And, I had time set aside to do that. And he didn't. And so I think for us, at least for me, being able to, one, learn how he specifically grieves, but then two, recognizing that it's different than mine and giving him the space to do that has been a really critical thing in our relationship, being able to just have that space.
Have you done anything together with husbands, or do you just usually get together as ladies?
Usually sorry, go ahead, Emma.
Oh yeah, usually it's just the women, but I've thought so many times I would love to do like small group dinners or something, because almost across the board, the women that I talk to, they all say, my husband is sad, my husband is grieving, and he doesn't have any friends he can talk to about this. And like my husband needs a daddy support group. Like he's trying to figure out how to be a dad and at the same time juggling like what we went through for 8 years, and he's never really had a chance to process it. So it's a lot for him. And so I would love to. Do you guys want to come over for dinner? I'll host.
I mean, let's do it.
This sounds like a great development. It makes me wonder, Christine, about, especially with your husband being in the military, how has he been able to manage that grief when he's even physically away from you?
Yeah, so for him, like the whole pregnancy, he was gone. So he wasn't really as connected as I was. It was kind of crazy because I was barely showing. And then all of a sudden, bam, I was like 6 months pregnant. And he's like, whoa, this is, I think when he came home, he's like, wow, this is like for real. This is real. Like, and so, I would send him photos of my belly growing, but he was more like because he was at war, he really just was kind of focusing and just getting through his days in the Middle East and stuff. So when he finally got back, I think it really just hit him like, wow, I just lost a baby and this is happening. So it was just a crazy transition for him because honestly, my husband is my rock. He helped me through everything and he's a fixer. I feel like husbands are mainly fixers. They want to fix things. And I feel like for him, he got super frustrated because this is something you can't really fix. You can't make this better. And so I think for him, he was just like, throughout the whole process of me being induced, he wanted to make sure I was okay. And I think the hard part was him watching me go through all this and being poked and prod and just like getting myself ready to have her. And I think that really just hit him of like, wow, like, I need to take care of my wife. I need to be there for her. And so he was there through thick and thin. I think for him, he has such a better understanding because he was there through the whole process of the process of her of her gone. And so he knew more than anyone else of exactly what we went through because he was there. But on top of it, for him, he dealt with grief differently because guys, again, like Chris said, guys are supposed to be strong. They're not supposed to show any emotion. He kind of was like, well, this happened. The cards were dealt to us like differently and this is how they were. And so closing that chapter and moving on. And that's how he dealt with it, and who am I to say that's the right or wrong way to grieve? That's his way of getting through it. So for me, I always told him after I gave birth to her, I remember laying down and telling him, I'm not the only one that lost a baby. You did too. Mm-hmm. And I know you're trying to take care of me, but what can I do to take care of you to know that your needs are being met? And he pretty much just said, do it. Like right now, I want to take care of you. And right now you're my priority and making sure you're okay. So we had that discussion. And then after that, it made us stronger. And honestly, when I found out she was gone, my first fear was, what is my husband going to say? Is this going to be a divorce? Is this going to cause a divorce? Because I was afraid of losing him too. Because you hear these stories that you can lose your partner in this process. And there's a lot of like back and forth of this is your fault kind of thing. And it's no one's fault. No one can prepare you for this. And even when losing a baby, like you have no control over that. It will never be the mother's fault. It will never be her fault.
Right.
So we came from it we definitely became stronger as a couple and we talked through it. And there was some frustrations where he wanted to fix things where I would be crying. He wanted to make me better and he would try to fix it. And I would get a little bit like frustrated because I'm like, let me cry. Right. Like you can't fix this. Let me cry. And so through therapy, she showed me how to help him help me by saying, just hold my hand and ride through this wave with me. And that's what you can do is help me like ride it through because there's nothing really you can fix here.
I feel like all the things that you're sharing are so helpful because even though each of you has had a different individual experience, there's so much overlap in how you have managed, with your grief, with your partner, with the experience. And I think it really is helpful for others to hear that that's normal too. And it's such a wonderful, wonderful thing that in spite of all of this trial and difficulty and trauma that you've had, that you've become closer as couples. That is so amazing because it's even more of a tragedy, I think, to go through something so difficult and then also to lose your relationship. That just seems so tragic. So what can you identify that has really, really helped you to manage your grief up until today? What would you say if you were going to pinpoint some things?
I think managing expectations when it comes to grief and not rushing myself to feel a certain way or to move on. I hate that phrase. You don't move on from grief. You move through it, you move forward, but you're never move on implies that it's something you can leave behind. And as we've talked about earlier, like that's grief becomes a part of you, right? As long as I love my child, I will also be sad that she's gone. Like, and that's grief. It's never going to go away. And so I think one, managing expectations that grief isn't a linear process, that you're not just going to go, okay, now I'm feeling, the stages of grief, right? Denial, acceptance, anger, blah, 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 like those stages. Sure, you know those, but they're not just in a nice, neat little line. And you can, oh, I'm feeling this. And then I move on to this stage and this stage and this stage, and then I'm done, right? Like that's not how it works. And so I think one thing that I have learned is managing that expectation and recognizing that grief is messy and that there are going to be waves and triggers hiding behind every corner, and to just brace yourself and recognize that, okay, I'm feeling this. I have to feel through this, whatever that looks like, whether it's crying or journaling or talking to my therapist or going to a PALS meeting or, spending some time alone or whatever I need to do, having a good shower, cry. Those are the best ones. So managing expectations, making space to feel my feelings and not feeling guilty about feeling them, and just recognizing this is okay. It's a normal human experience and I'm going to feel it and feel through the feelings. And then I think lastly would just be finding ways to, one, share, and two, bring meaning to Emily's life and loss. And for me, that has looked different all the time. It's kind of an evolving thing. Sometimes that looks like, sharing her story with others, whether it be like on a podcast or something like that. Helping others through their own loss gives me a lot of meaning, because if I'm going to go through something so terrible and sucky, the least I can do to make it feel less terrible and sucky and pointless is to help somebody else go through it too. Like helping somebody else through their own grief and loss helps me feel like my loss was less meaningless, And I feel like it's the only way that I can parent Emily now, sharing her story and helping and listening to others as they share theirs, I feel like is the only way that I can parent her, that I
That's
can't,
a really sweet connection. I like
attend
that.
something that she's doing at school or throw a birthday party for her or whatever, but I can help somebody else go through something that is also tough. And that's my little nod to her and the way that I can parent her. And then just, celebrating holidays, whether other people remember them or not, I remember them and they're meaningful to me. And so finding those little traditions and things that I can do to help remember her and make my own space to feel her.
That's nice. That's really nice. What role has faith played for any of you in the process? Has it been helpful? Have you had more questions about whether there is a God, whether it's just what has that been like, that experience?
Well, I'll say that for me. So I grew up in a Christian household. My dad was a pastor, and I would get really frustrated when people would say, "Oh, God has a plan. Just trust God." No, this is not God's plan. Like,
Right.
it's not God's plan for babies to die. This is not God's plan. And if that's the God that you think is, if you think there's a God that's making a plan for babies to die, like, this is a problem in my
count
mind.
me out, right?
Yeah, this is
No,
not
thank
great.
you.
This is not good. And so that really was difficult for me. And it was really difficult. I was attending many churches that truly believed, and I grew up very conservative Christian, very, 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 very conservative Christian. And so a lot of the churches that I was going to truly believed that a woman's sole purpose was to have a baby and to have a family and to be a stay-at-home mom. And so that became really difficult for me to feel like I was now failing the church and failing in this higher plan that was supposed to be laid out for my life. And I struggled through that.
Then you add religious trauma to all of this other trauma.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it was a big moment when I realized that a lot of the shame that I felt about infertility, and Christine, I wonder if you feel some of this too, being like maybe I can't make a baby that will live earthside. There's a lot of shame about the barren woman in the Bible.
Absolutely. I have to agree with you. I feel like society for women as our duty is to bear children, and it feels like a failure if you're unable to do it. And so I feel like right when you get married, the next question is,
Oh my
when are you going to
gosh.
have kids?
When you get
Right.
engaged, that's
Yeah.
what they ask.
And it's like,
Right.
it's a lot of pressure for us, especially if we can't perform. And so it's
Right.
like, it's even now, it's like, try again. And like, that is so
Mm,
painful and hurtful because it's just like,
mhm.
look, like we just went through a traumatic experience and you guys want to have us try again. Or like, everyone's telling us, well, God has a plan for you. You're going to have a child. I'm like, how do you know that? Like, right now, we're grieving our first and they don't know the specifics yet, but I feel like they're doing more harm than good when people do say that.
Yeah, I thank you so much for sharing that because I can really, really appreciate what you're saying. It's such a disconnect from when you actually read like the words of Christ and how he spoke to women, how he spoke about women. It's so different than this shame and duty kind of culture that you're talking about. So that definitely feels like a disconnect to me from who Christ really was and how he would speak to all of us in our trauma and in our pain. And
Yeah.
it's interesting. My it was one of the complaints that my late husband had that he said when my wife passed away, the last thing I wanted was some book about how glorious, God's plan was. He said, okay, I believe that in my heart. It's in there somewhere, but that's not what I want to hear right now. That's not that does not bring comfort. It actually brings pain. And one of my favorite books was C.S. Lewis, A Grief Observed. I don't know if you've read that one, but he's really, really, it's basically his journal when his wife passed away. And and he really has to reconcile this very question of how can this be how can this be of God? How can this be God's will that I experienced so much pain, that she experienced so much pain? But I think on the other side of that, I think that's like almost like an eclipse, like the solar eclipse. You have to get on the other side of that to see real hope and real meaning. And it's not the platitudes. And um, so thank you for sharing that.
One thing I was going to add when you were asking about how, how do you kind of process it today, and what did you do to kind of not move on? That's not the phrase, but like, how do you keep going? I think for me is I had to find things that I loved. Like I had to find things that brought me joy and that made me happy. And sometimes that was a chocolate bar. Like I'll totally admit that. Like sometimes in that moment where it's just like, I'm using this chocolate as a substance to
Right.
help with something on the inside. And I recognize that that's maybe an unhealthy long-term mentality, but today that's what I'm doing. And then
But
sometimes
sure, it
it
is
was,
unhealthy, right? Because
right,
you know it.
yeah,
You know, you're like, this
yeah,
chocolate bar, this gift that I'm going to have right now is making me happy. That's
yeah.
different than just having it and not making the connection.
Exactly. There you go. And I think that being in nature was another really big thing for me. I'm not really sure exactly what it is about nature, but there was something about going into the silence of nature where I didn't have cell phone reception. I felt I have this property in Montana that I go to all the time, and I could feel there that I was separate from my problems. I was
Mm,
separate from my grief in a way that allowed me to observe it more like a thing and not like my identity. And I think that
yeah.
helped me process it more and feel like there was something out, like I could exist and be outside of my grief at times. And there was hope for the future, that it wasn't going to be as overwhelming and sad and powerful as it felt in that moment. So
Yep.
I think for me, that's one of the ways that I processed things. And I don't really identify myself as a Christian anymore, mainly because I just disagree with some of how organized religion works. But I think that you see God and you see love in nature. And I think for me, that's a lot of what I leaned on, was looking for a higher power and looking for something outside of myself. Whether it was a plan or not, that doesn't matter. But just something greater connecting us. And there's true hope in that. There's true hope in that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I bet, and it seems like it's direct to you. It's not that there's not a prism that is going through to you when you're out there. It's you and the nature just directly right into your soul. I can see that being just so healing and helpful.
Can I add to what helped me too as
Please.
well? So for me, like even getting out of bed was hard enough when it all was happening. And so honestly, I promised myself that I would live my life to the fullest because my baby didn't get to live her life. So for me, I got out of bed for my baby and for my husband. That was one of the big steps for me to start getting out of the house. And I know my husband means like he could not see me in such a big grief that he's like, I need you to get out of the house. Like, I don't care if it's a car ride or if it's going to the gym, get out of the house because I hate seeing you like this. So,
Right.
of course, it was snowing during the time in January in Spokane. You can't really go out and walk and do any of that. So I just went to the gym on the treadmill and just was walking. And that kind of helped me in just listening to a podcast to get to the space of like where I needed to be. And then I realized, I know my daughter would be so sad to see me crying like this. I know she would be upset seeing me the way I am, and just like knowing that she's okay. And I I use a lot of symbolic things for her. And one symbolic thing is a butterfly. Anytime I see a butterfly, it's her sign saying, Mom, I'm okay. I love you. And so anytime I see a butterfly, I feel like that's her telling me, hey, I'm still here. I'm okay. I love you. And it's just her little ways of knowing that she's around. She'll always be here with me. And so also I grew up in a very, very religious home as well. And my family is Baptist. So I went to a very Christian school, and I did kind of stray a little bit away from my faith, but I feel like with this experience, it's kind of gone a little bit closer to God. I know God would never want my baby to never want this for my baby. I know he wouldn't want that. I know he wouldn't I know my baby's in heaven, and I hate it when people say she's in a better place. That just aggravates me because in a better place, she would be in my arms. But
Right.
I know she's she's safe right now. So that to me is just some type of healing for me, knowing that it just gives me a little bit of healing. Just she is in a safe place. I wouldn't say necessarily she's in a better place, but I know she's somewhere where I know she's not in pain. So
Right. Thank you so much for sharing those they're really intimate feelings and thoughts, and I'm really grateful for your openness and sharing it. Thank you so much. Chris, did you want to add anything to that?
I was just thinking as you guys were talking. So I like I don't think I invented this term, but I like to use the term faith-splaining. When someone tries to use faith to explain away your feelings or your grief. So saying things exactly like what you just said, well, she's in a better place, or she's with Jesus, or God has a plan, or well, families are forever, or you'll see her again. Yes, I know all of those things are true. Like I grew up very Christian as well. I still am. And I feel like this experience has strengthened my faith. I would say even solidified it. And so when people would say things like that, like you said earlier, Julie, it was meant to be, or the person that was saying it was meant to be helpful, but it's actually really hurtful. It does the exact opposite. It makes me feel like I'm not allowed to feel these feelings, or if I only had more faith, then I wouldn't be suffering so much. And that's one thing that I also have had to learn about grief, is that these two opposing things can coexist. I can have faith that my daughter is safe, like you said, and that I will see her again. Yes, I believe all of those things. To my very core, I believe them. But it's also possible to, at the same time, feel sad that she's not here with me. And that doesn't negate my faith. That doesn't mean that I don't have enough faith. I feel like grief is a very human experience, and that's part of life, And so to say, oh, well, just pray more or whatever, trying to use those faith principles to explain away my feelings really irritated me at first. Now I've kind of gotten used to it and I can just, let it roll off or whatever. But in the beginning, it was very, very hard for me to accept that. And because I was in a faith situation always, I went to church on Sundays and I was talking to, family and friends who are of the same faith. And so I was repeatedly getting these messages, and at first it was really, really hard for me to accept, like, just recognize that the person was trying to be kind and they weren't trying to be hurtful. But it felt hurtful at the time because it was almost insulting, like, you're calling into question my faith. You're making me feel like I'm not doing enough, like if only I had prayed more, then maybe she'd still be alive. Or if only I was more faithful, then maybe God would have given me a miracle or whatever, And so, yeah, I think that was super hard to deal with at first. But like I said, I feel like faith has been my bedrock and my survival throughout this entire experience. And I feel like I have gotten to know Jesus on a totally different level than I ever would have without this. And so while I won't say I'm glad that my daughter died, I will say I'm grateful for the lessons that I have learned because of it, not only in seeing the good in others and the humanity, right? Like the way that people rallied around us and people came out of the woodwork and said, oh, me too. When we had talked about a loss, people would say, me too, or they just give you that look because that they know and they understand each other. You could pass each other in the hall at church and nobody had to say a word, but you knew that that person understood what you were going through because they came forward and said, yeah, I've had a loss too. I get that,
Yeah.
So I think restoring my faith in humanity as far as like people rallying around us and giving us peace and comfort, but then also even now, 5 years later, I still have little, I call them tender mercies, that are like little nods that God is aware of me and he knows what I'm feeling and what I'm experiencing. And he sends me those little moments, whether it's someone sending me a text message with a butterfly, hey, just thinking about you today, or hey, I wore my Emily shirt yesterday and forgot to tell you, or hey, I saw a butterfly today, or just even, hey, just thinking of you, how's it going? Just little moments where I know that God is aware of me and he sends other people to help me feel his love.
What I think about is just the story of Jesus with Lazarus, where he just wept. He showed that he cared and loved. And really, it's a really personal kind of experience. Thank you for sharing those things.
That has become one of my most favorite stories.
Right. Right. He didn't explain anything. He just was there in the moment and wept. He showed that humanity, that love. My last question that I ask everyone is, what do you think it means to grieve well? And Emma, we'll start with you, Christine, and then Chris. And then thank you again for the time that you spent with me today.
I think that it means to be present in the moment and let yourself experience whatever you're experiencing. I think it's almost easier sometimes to answer the opposite question, which is, what does it mean to grieve poorly?
Can be helpful.
And I know that I did that for a long time, of just shoving down all of the emotions and judging my emotions and feeling like I should feel a certain way or I shouldn't feel a certain way. And so I think that grieving well means just showing up in the moment and letting yourself feel whatever you feel. And I also think it means sharing that experience. I think that grieving well builds community and builds relationship. And you do that by sharing what you've been through, like we're doing here. So that's what I would say.
Thank you so much. I love what you're saying. Love that. Christine.
Yeah, I have to agree with Emma. Being able to share your experience and not to be afraid of just, the way you're feeling, there's no right or wrong way. So, whatever you talk about, there should never be judgment on the way you feel. And then on top of it, for me, for grieving, don't be afraid to talk about your infertility or your baby's name and just sharing um, just sharing your memories of them and just knowing that, this is like, none of this is like, honestly, for me, like, this is something like talking about is helping you grieve and talking about it and just getting the support you need, because that's what I did right away, because I knew that in order to grieve, I needed the help, and don't be afraid to ask for help.
Love that. Thank you. Chris.
Gosh, I don't know if I have anything to add. You guys said it. No, but really, truly, like feeling your feelings, feeling them together with other people who get it, and getting help when you need help, and recognizing that it's okay. Like, this is not a solo experience, like grief is hard and it's messy, and nobody should ever have to do it by themselves.
Thank you so much. It's so clear to me that being able to share your experiences has been extremely unifying for you, and I can see that it has helped you to get through such a hard thing that you've gone through. Thank you again for sharing with me. I really appreciate it, and I know what you have to share is going to be very helpful for others. So thank you.